turns out that pretty much everyone is searching for something. Most people are searching for the most unbearable place to live, the worst business, the ugliest car, the most detestable spouse, and the emptiest bank account. Strike that, reverse it. The last two quests, the searches for the fat pocketbook and Captain America for a husband, are the chief components of just about every tale brought into existence by the brilliantly redundant 19th century novelist Jane Austen. Anyway, back to the money. I mean the love. Honey. Love. The decision will have to be made by the five Bennet sisters in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. But before we begin our tale, I ought to introduce you to a couple of friends of mine. Over here, we have Mr. Bingley. He was quite young, wonderfully handsome, extremely agreeable, fond of dancing, and he had 5,000 a year. His love of dancing was a lucky thing for the Bennet sisters, for to be fond of dancing was a certain step towards falling in love, and very lively hopes of Mr. Bingley's heart were entertained. If Bingley is Captain America, Mr. Darcy over here is Iron Man, a lot richer and not quite as nice. In the author's words, he soon drew the attention of the room by his fine, tall person, handsome features, noble mien, and the report which was in general circulation after 5 minutes of his entrance of his having 10,000 a year. The gentlemen declared him to be a fine figure of a man. The ladies declared he was much handsomer than Mr. Bingley, and he was looked on with great admiration for about half the evening until his manners gave a disgust which turned the tide of his popularity. And now for the wives that they must be in want of. Mrs. Bennet's favourite, Jane Bennet, is the oldest. She's mild-mannered, pretty, and a very eligible bachelorette. Mr. Bennet's favourite, Elizabeth, is the second oldest. She was by far the smartest, most sensible, and quickest to judge of the bunch. So in sum, we have Bingley, the happy, wealthy one, Darcy, the sometimes condescending, very wealthy one, Jane, the happy, nice girl, and Elizabeth, the smart, sometimes condescending girl. Can you tell who's going to fall in love? Whoa! Look at the time. Jane Austen has done it again. We're out of time for a story today, my friends. Thanks. Just kidding. Before us we have an epic tale of pride, prejudice, love, and treasure. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Mr. Bingley purchases the estate next to the Bennets, and just like that, he and Jane, drop-dead gorgeous, fell deeply in love. But her younger sister, Elizabeth, was not so lucky. At the ball where Bingley and Darcy met the Bennets, Bingley quietly suggested to Darcy that he dance with Elizabeth, who was sitting nearby without a partner. But Darcy replied, "She is tolerable, I suppose, but not handsome enough to tempt me." But his comment was overheard by Elizabeth herself, who caught red-handed in insult. Mr. Bennet's cousin comes to town. His 19th century eHarmony profile would read, white and nerdy clergyman, prepares compliments ahead of time for young ladies, awkward dancer, but doesn't know it. He came to the Bennets for the chief purpose of choosing a wife. At first he fancied Jane, but Mrs. Bennet dissuaded him from pursuing her. Mr. Collins had only to change from Jane to Elizabeth, and it was soon done while Mrs. Bennet was stirring the fire. To the relief of the world, however, Elizabeth chose love and denied his offer of marriage, but her friend, Charlotte Lucas, was not so lucky. "Considering Mr. Collins' character, connection, and situation in life, I'm convinced that my chance of happiness with him is as fair as most people can boast upon entering the marriage date. Happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of luck, you know." Right. In Elizabeth's words, she would have sacrificed every better feeling to worldly advantage. Charlotte, the new wife of Mr. Collins, was a most humiliating picture. Now turn your gaze to a most interesting yet somewhat unnecessary turn of events. Because we need not dwell on the following episode, we will get it over with rather speedily. Mr. Wickham comes to town. His dating profile will read, not as handsome as I think I am, occasionally charming, large mole on upper lip, runs away with 16-year-old girls, frighteningly honest and yet a total liar. I will take any girl I can get. You don't really want him in your neighborhood. He came to the Bennets with the chief purpose of choosing a wife. And finding money after the marriage. But he didn't end up getting that. And Lydia, the youngest, most reckless daughter of the Bennet family, was looking for a handsome man who was wearing a military uniform, who could ride a horse, and act as immature as she usually did. Some treasure. They surprised the world by running away together, coming back married, giving all the smart people in the Bennett family high blood pressure. Now back to the real story. While Elizabeth was visiting Mr. and Mrs. Collins, Mr. Darcy actually visits and proposes marriage to Elizabeth. Mr. Darcy!
Miss Bennet, you must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you.
I have every reason in the world to think ill of you, even though you are the most richest and most handsomest man I have ever beheld. No motive can excuse the unjust and ungenerous part you acted. Ouch. But as it usually goes in the other 5 love novels written by Jane Austen, the lovers hate each other, but then they come around. When asked by one of Mr. Bingley's sisters what he was pondering, Darcy replied, "I have been meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes on the face of a pretty woman can bestow. Those of Miss Elizabeth Bennet's bestow a very great pleasure." In a strange turn of events, Elizabeth and her aunt and uncle actually visit Pemberley, Darcy's magnificent estate. Darcy wasn't supposed to be home at the time, away on some business, but he returned a couple of days early, surprising Elizabeth and her relatives. He treated them in the most cordial, suave, gentlemanlike manner, and I might add, Elizabeth was impressed. Eventually, Bingley proposes to Jane, they get married, Miss Elizabeth Bennet becomes Mrs. Darcy, and the couples never had cause to regret their decision. Except for Charlotte, of course. We know for sure that Bingley and Darcy most definitely chose their wives because of love, because Jane and Elizabeth had nothing to offer them in the way of treasure or dowry, you might call it. But the question is, did Jane and Elizabeth choose their husbands based off of the golden halls they would call their homes, or for love and immaterial happiness for the rest of their lives? Elizabeth shed some light on our suspicions. I am convinced that only the deepest love could induce me into matrimony. Jane and Elizabeth understood the true treasure that marriage can be when you marry for love. Especially when you're in love with a millionaire.